Zoro and Sanji are the two pillars of strength for the future Pirate King's crew. They represent Luffy's wings as his greatest support that will allow him to soar to the throne. As you all know, Zoro vs Sanji is a very polarizing subject within the community, and it's not because people think Sanji is stronger, which a minority of people unironically believe, it's because of the gap in power. Zoro is the number 2 of the Straw Hat Pirates, and due to this he typically fights the second strongest in the enemy organization. Zoro is obviously stronger than Sanji, that should go without saying, so don't take this as a versus battle but more of a breakdown of them as combatants in general. So the focus here will be the gap in power between Zoro and Sanji as of the end of the Egghead arc. But before we delve into it though, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy content like this. I know I won't be able to please everyone with this no matter what I say, but as always your support is much appreciated. There is something I'd like to preface before we get started, just in case anyone brings this up in the comments. Feetsum portrayal from earlier in the story has no bearing on how Zoro and Sanji compare in the current story. For example, just because Luffy and Zoro had an equal fight in Whiskey Peak and were stated to be equals at different points before the time skip, doesn't make Zoro Yonko level as of the Egghead arc. I wish this could go without saying, but unfortunately there's always that someone. Anyways, by the end of the Wano arc, Zoro and Sanji gained 2 major power-ups since the beginning of the post-time skip. For Sanji, his time using the raid suit awakened the science in his body, which gave him an exoskeleton, abnormal regeneration, and great physical strength. As for Zoro, he awakened advanced Conqueror's Haki, which means he's among the handful of the very strongest in the world. Not only can he coat his swords with Conqueror's Haki, but he also developed a new sword style called King of Hell. In this mode, Zoro's swords are not only cladded in armament Haki, but they also exude green flames of Haki and the black lightning of a conqueror. Now that their new abilities have been covered, we can move on to their stats, starting with speed. As you all know, Sanji has 2 modes of speed, his normal speed and his vanishing speed, which is like a limit breaker mode. Sanji's normal speed more or less rivals Hybrid Queen, as they're able to trade and land attacks on each other. Queen is able to not only tag Sanji with Henry Queen, but he's also able to catch Sanji while he's running away with Winch Queen. On the other hand, Sanji was able to dodge the Sparking Queen lasers and also land his Flanchette strike. Sanji doesn't have many crazy speed feats on Egghead, but the most notable one would be when he intercepted Kizaru's laser to save Bonnie and Kuma. Sanji has other moments intercepting top tiers such as Miss Joro, however in both cases Kizaru and Miss Joro are targeting Bonnie, which doesn't require much of their speed. The Queen fight is still a better representation of Sanji's normal speed since they're both going all out. However, Sanji's ridiculous speed is displayed with his vanishing speed at the end of the Queen fight. Sanji moves so fast using Skywalk that Queen could no longer see him. Oda clarified in the SBS that this power to vanish is an effect of great speed, and as of this recording, he's only used this against Queen. Although Queen comes across as a big goofball, he's still able to perceive speedsters like Marco even when he's not exhausted, albeit he was carrying Zoro at the time. Marco was fast enough to intercept Kizaru's Yasakani no Magatama that was targeted for Whitebeard. Sanji's vanishing speed would be on a higher tier of speed in comparison to that, which is crazy to think about. The reason why I called it a limit breaker is because it takes a big toll on Sanji's stamina. However, it's still a deadly move when used in spurts or as a finishing move. When it comes to Zoro's speed, he's similar to Sanji in the sense he also has 2 modes of speed. His normal speed would be when he's doing regular sword strikes, however when he uses named techniques, he has short bursts of high speed. An example of this would be the Lion Song technique, which is stated in the Vira card to gauge the necessary speed, power and the angle to cut by sensing the enemy's breath. For Zoro's normal speed, he's consistently shown to be on par with King throughout their fight. Zoro is able to keep up and block King's attacks and vice versa, showing their relativity. However, when Zoro uses a name technique such as the Ultra Tiger Hunt, he's able to completely blitz flame off King. It's stated in both the manga and King's Vivid Card entry that when King turns off the flame on his back, both his movements and techniques become faster. Just like with the Tiger Hunt, the same thing happened when Zoro used Dragon Damnation to blitz King and cut down his ultimate technique. Even against Lucci, Zoro's on par with his speed when using regular sword strikes. However, he's able to completely blitz Lucci when he uses his Huhuva Spots technique. This is impressive as Lucci's speed was noted by Vegapunk to be astonishing as he fought Gear 5 Luffy. He was also able to react to and dodge Giant Gear 5's bite attack using Razor. As of this recording, most would consider Zoro blitzing Hybrid Kaido using Ashura whilst being mortally wounded as his best speed feat, even though Kaido wasn't using Future Sight. This is still extremely impressive given Zoro's condition. However, it's hard to measure just how impressive it really is, considering base Luffy after awakening Advanced Conquerors was able to blitz this same Kaido. That isn't to say that Ashura's speed in this instance caps at base Luffy, however it's unclear how much faster it really is. It gets even more weird when considering Zoro dodging Lucci's Shugun Spots, which is arguably his fastest technique, then blitzing him is probably a better speed feat than blitzing that suppressed Hybrid Kaido. That might sound crazy at first, but when you really think about it, that could unironically be the case. The reason being that Lucci was able to react to Giant Gear 5's bite attack, however Kaido was unable to react and got blitzed by base Luffy, who just awakened Advanced Conquerors. Unless Gear 5 Luffy in this specific moment is for whatever reason deciding to fight at a lower speed than he was in base when his Advanced Conquerors haki was still crude and clumsy, it would suggest that Lucci was fighting at a higher speed than suppressed Kaido was in chapter 1010. At the very least, a healthy Zoro using Ashura should be much faster than 1010 Luffy and Kaido, with slightly higher interpretations having his lower techniques reaching similar speeds. So long story short, when Zoro is using his strongest name techniques, he's able to reach high speeds and can land attacks on top tiers like Kaido. So when comparing Zoro and Sanji's speed scaling, Zoro's normal speed is clearly faster than Sanji's normal speed that more or less rivals Hybrid Queen. However, with Sanji's power to vanish, he takes the edge over Zoro even when he uses name techniques. Moving at vanishing speed still takes a toll on Sanji's stamina, so realistically he would only do this in short bursts across a fight. The only reason why he constantly used it against Queen was because he went invisible, and that was Sanji's way of countering him. Some may point out how Zoro was able to react to King seemingly vanishing and draw symmetry to Sanji's speed. However, this isn't the same thing. Zoro is still able to perceive King, hence why he's able to track his movements, then counter with his bird dance technique. King vanishing off the page is just to emphasize that he went into his speed mode by turning off the flame on his back. This way of emphasizing one's speed, whether it be from the audience or opponent's point of view, isn't foreign in One Piece. We've even seen King use name techniques with his speed mode a couple of times before this, and Zoro was always able to track him. Whereas with Sanji, his power to vanish is something Oda actually acknowledged as one of his abilities, so this isn't just an edgy way to upscale his speed. Sanji's power to vanish puts him on a higher speed tier than Marco, and a fatigued Marco is able to blitz flame on King, who can keep up with Zoro's normal movements. So whether you like it or not, Sanji's speed scaling at its peak is higher than Zoro's at the moment. With the speed section out of the way, we can move on to their attack power or AP, and this part is extremely straightforward. In the rooftop battle against Kaido, Zoro displayed his ability to damage and cut into his dragon skills. This is particularly impressive for Zoro as opposed to the other supernova because it's not 100% clear if he has internal Ryo or not. We know Zoro can use advanced armament, otherwise he wouldn't be able to damage Kaido. However, just being able to emit one's haki or Ryo doesn't entail internal damage. This is the stage of armament haki that old man Hyogoro was trying to teach Luffy, but Luffy went a level beyond and attained internal Ryo, which Hyogoro couldn't perform. With that said, Zoro being able to physically cut through Kaido's dragon scales scales him above Gear 4 Luffy in Act 1, who couldn't even deal damage to base Kaido. Act 1 Luffy up until that point had demonstrated that his raw power was much greater than the likes of Doflamingo and Katakuri. It doesn't just stop there, as Big Mom warned Kaido to dodge Zoro's Dragon Blaze, which he didn't do for any of the other Supernova's attacks, which included Luffy's Kong Rifle and Law's Gamma Knife. So even before awakening Advanced Conqueror's Haki, Zoro was comparable to Ryo Gear 4 Luffy, who had grown much stronger since his fight with Katakuri. Zoro's crazy feats on the rooftop don't stop there, as he was able to slash Kaido and leave a permanent scar despite being mortally wounded. This was the greatest wound Kaido had suffered up until this point since his fight against Oden. Zoro was able to eclipse everything the Supernova had done up until this point because his Ashura technique was infused with Conqueror's Haki. I know this is still a debatable subject, which really shouldn't be one, since it's been made abundantly clear that Armament Haki alone isn't enough to deal lasting damage to Kaido. Zoro realized against King that the correct way of using Enma was by not restricting the amount of Haki flowing out from his sword, but by letting it all flow, which is exactly what he did with Ashura. Anyways, Zoro's ultimate stage of his power is his King of Hell mode, which is when he flows out his armament and Conqueror's Haki at max output. Although his King of Hell mode gives him greater strength, he can't use it for a long time as he runs the risk of losing his life to Enma, which constantly drains his Haki. In this mode, Zoro had the power to defeat King with only 3 named techniques, albeit King was in his speed mode in these moments. However, King still acknowledged the threat Zoro represented and started dodging and blocking his attacks, which is something he didn't do before. Zoro takes note of this and questions if King is scared that he can deal lasting damage to him despite his Lunarian defense. When the flame on his back is on, King's durability is even greater than Kaido's, which is a testament to Zoro's power. Zoro also scales above King's self-explosion attack, which Zoro said would have killed him had he not clad himself in Armament Haki. However, Hybrid Kaido was unable to kill a mortally wounded defenseless Zoro with his Thunder Bagua, albeit he was arguably suppressed. Zoro also scales above suppressed Gear 5 based on their fights against awakened Lucci. Although Lucci got dominated by Luffy, he was still able to withstand and recover from his assault relatively quickly. On the other hand, all it took was one named attack from Zoro to deal a lethal blow and pretty much take him down. Even though Luffy didn't use Advanced Conqueror's Haki, it doesn't make Zoro's feat any less impressive, as Luffy was still in his awakened form and Zoro didn't even use his King of Hell sword style. Now for Sanji, he's able to deal lasting damage to Queen with just his Diable Jambe techniques. This is impressive as Queen was able to endure Marco's Phoenix brand despite suffering internal damage. Queen was even able to endure 2 hits from base Big Mom without suffering any visible injuries. That's not to say Big Mom didn't damage Queen, as he was still knocked out of his zone form, but he still remained conscious and got up relatively fine shortly after. When King went on a rampage, Queen was hit by one of his air slashes, which sent Zoro flying. Zoro acknowledged King's strength after his attack, and Queen was able to tank the same attack with no problems. With Sanji's strongest Diable Jambe technique, he was able to send Queen flying into another corridor and deal significant damage. To put into perspective just how strong it was, this was the first attack Sanji landed after his Jambe awakening, and prior to which he was still struggling to break Queen's toughness, which means the vast majority of the damage Queen suffered was towards the end of the fight, starting with the Hell Memories. Sanji's flames don't stop there, because his strongest flame as of this recording is his Ifrit Jambe. This gave Sanji greater speed, which in turn makes its power much stronger than Diable Jambe. By using a 9 technique combo, Sanji was able to knock Queen out of his zone form and send him flying off the island. Ifrit Jambe should scale above Queen's strongest techniques, which include the Brachio Bomber, which was strong enough to damage Big Mom, albeit she was off guard. Even if it's just shallow damage, Big Mom said her head was killing her, and there's even these cracking sound effects to emphasize the damage. As of this recording, Sanji's strongest technique is Ifrit Jambe Hell Memories, and he uses it alongside Bonnie and Frankie's strongest moves to help Luffy send Mars flying. This combined attack between the three of them manages to damage Luffy, which is impressive because he's in his balloon form, which is consistently shown to be more durable than his regular form. Frankie more or less scales to Sasaki, and he doesn't have Haki, so he wasn't a big contributing factor, but for Gear 5 Bonnie, her strength is hard to assess. Just for the sake of argument, let's say Sanji puts in 60% of the work. That's still impressive, especially considering Gear 5 can endure Conqueror's coated attacks from Kaido and continue fighting like it's nothing. With all that said, when directly comparing their AP scaling, it's simply a night and day's difference. Zoro just has far better scaling and feats, and it wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say his strongest advanced armament techniques alone rivals or surpasses some of Sanji's strongest Diable and Ifrit Janbei techniques. The best feat Sanji has against the top tier is his trio attack against Luffy, but like I said before, Ifrit Janbei Hell's memory still has vague scaling. It's also not clear whether or not the trio attack dealt shallow or lasting damage on Luffy, and Sanji's attack only dealt a fraction of the damage. Whereas Zoro instilled caution in Big Mom and Kaido with his Dragon Blaze and surprised Big Mom by cutting through Kaido's scales, all before mastering advanced Conqueror's Haki. Zoro even has stronger techniques than the Dragon Blaze that he didn't use, such as the 3000 Worlds and the Billion-fold Trichiliocosm, which would be even more lethal. So it pretty much goes without saying that these advanced armament techniques would also be enough to deal lasting damage to Queen. Even if you were to be super generous to Sanji, his attack power still wouldn't be on the level of King of Hell Zoro. Not only has Zoro scarred Kaido, but his Conqueror's coated attacks were a threat to King's defense mode, which is even more durable than Kaido. Zoro even has scaling above hybrid Kaido's Thunder Bagua from chapter 1010, whereas Sanji doesn't have feats on that level. To put that scale into perspective, Flame on King is able to completely tank his own self-explosion, but Zoro's King of Hell is implied to be a threat to that nigh invincible body. I'm sure someone is going to act clever and comment that King's own flames naturally can't hurt him, but that's never stated or implied. So Zoro's advanced Conqueror's Haki is just outright stronger than chapter 1010 hybrid Kaido's Thunder Bagua that easily knocked down Law. Mastering advanced Conquerors made Zoro grow from not being able to damage Flame on King with even his strongest armament techniques to being a threat to King's nigh invincible durability. Luffy also had a similar jump in power when he awakened, as he was finally able to deal lasting damage to Kaido in only his base form, whereas his prior Gear 4 with internal Ryo was only dealing shallow damage. So it's no exaggeration to say that Zoro gained a beyond Gear 4 level amp from mastering Conqueror's Haki. So that does it for both the speed and attack power sections, so finally we can wrap up with their durability and endurance. In the context of power scaling, durability scaling measures how much one can withstand and resist. In other words, measuring the severity of damage one suffers from attacks, whereas endurance measures one's stamina to continue fighting despite being attacked for a prolonged period of time. So for Sanji, he has the luxury of having an exoskeleton which makes him more durable than the average human. Despite being off guard, Queen's sword snapped on Sanji's neck simply because his exoskeleton is that tough. Similarly, against S-Shark, Sanji outright tanked his punch right to the face without even flinching. Normally, Zoro can't replicate these feats, however by using armament haki, he can clad himself in a tough armor to withstand these attacks. In fact, Zoro's armament haki was so tough that he was able to withstand King's self-explosion attack and get back up fairly quickly, albeit he was knocked down initially. For as tough as Sanji's exoskeleton is, he's still vulnerable to the likes of Queen's attacks, which was able to deal lasting damage a couple of times. So normally, Sanji is a lot more durable than Zoro since he's an enhanced human. However, whenever Zoro uses armament haki, he can put up a defense that's extremely durable in its own right. As for their endurance, Zoro is on another level to Sanji, and it's really not that close. Zoro was able to endure the combined attack by Big Mom and Kaido Kaido and was able to continue fighting despite having 20 to 30 of his bones broken. Even Law was shocked that Zoro could still fight given his condition, and this is the same man that could endure a hybrid Thunder Bagua and multiple attacks from Big Mom later on and still continue fighting. That's not to say Sanji's endurance is bad or anything, as he was already injured when he fought Queen and he still won in the end. These injuries came from enduring a beating from Black Maria, all while not using armament haki to defend himself, and briefly fighting King and Queen at the same time. Sanji also has a level of regeneration which amended his broken bones, but outside of his initial awakening, he doesn't have any notable feats in this department. So even though Sanji still has decent feats, it's still pretty clear that Zoro is the superior. Now that each of the main stats have been fully covered, we can confidently say that the gap in power between Zoro and Sanji as combatants isn't close at all. The only category Sanji has Zoro beat in is speed, and that's only when using vanishing speed, which takes a toll on his stamina and would realistically only be used in spurts or as a finishing move. Since Sanji can't use that speed for a significant amount of time, it's not enough to close the gap as combatants when Zoro makes up for it with a pretty big endurance and AP advantage. Zoro also has his share of drawbacks since he can't use King of Hell for a long time, but is not as detrimental as Sanji's when stacked up against the verse as a whole. Zoro doesn't have a speed disadvantage against almost all high tiers like Law, Kid, Katakuri, etc, and his Ryo techniques alone are strong enough to damage almost anyone. King of Hell techniques can be reserved whenever Zoro has a clear opening or whenever the fight is heading to its climax and he's going for the finisher, so he doesn't put his life constantly at risk. Whereas with Sanji, even if he's faster than most of the verse with his invisible speed, there are still some high tiers that can straight up endure his attacks long enough or have certain abilities that can allow them to wait for an opening when Sanji drops his invisible speed. However, if they're up against top tiers like the Admirals and the Emperors, then both Sanji and Zoro's drawbacks would be a huge disadvantage. I'm not saying this as the end all be all argument, but if I was to simplify this as much as possible, Zoro is a master of both advanced armament and Conqueror's haki, with the latter being a power that only a handful of the very strongest have the ability to use, whereas Sanji is only a master of the basic applications of armament and observation and doesn't have the luxury of an extremely powerful Gelfu. Even though Sanji is an augmented human, which you can view in a similar way to a Delphi power, he just hasn't done enough with those advancements to make up the difference as an overall combatant. I know I said this wasn't supposed to be a versus battle, but if Zoro and Sanji did fight, it would only take a few strong techniques for Zoro to get the win. Zoro's advanced armament techniques alone have better feats and portrayal than even Queen's strongest moves, and they were enough to deal lasting damage to Sanji. The only issue Zoro will have is landing those techniques if Sanji uses his vanishing speed to evade them. Sanji would use his opportunity to wear down Zoro with both Diable and Ifrit Jambe techniques, which would definitely be effective. However, Zoro is still more than capable of enduring these attacks. We've seen how strong Zoro can be even with 20 to 30 of his bones broken, and it's not like Sanji would be able to deal a cumulative damage roughly equal to Big Mom and Kaido's Hakai before Zoro can land any heavy techniques. So all Zoro has to do is wait for the moment Sanji lets go of his vanishing speed to blitz him with a King of Hell style technique and end the fight. As of this recording, the Elbaf arc has just begun, so both Zoro and Sanji could show new feats, power-ups and abilities that would warrant an update, but as of the end of the Egghead arc, this is how Zoro and Sanji compare to one another, and it's really not that close.